Hello my lovelies, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I am going to be doing the philosophy of reading tag. So this tag has been like all over my subscription feed. Loads of people are doing it. It was created by the lovely Brandon over at Brandon's Bookshelf. I highly suggest you check him out, especially for non-fiction recommendations, because basically my Amazon basket is massive now because he keeps recommending all these good books. So yes, I highly recommend you check him out. And he's put together these questions which are basically just about your reading habits and stuff. And actually, while I've been watching people do the tag, it's kind of felt to me like a lot of these would be much better questions for the BookTube newbie tag than the ones that are actually in the BookTube newbie tag. So just a little side thought for you. He also said you don't have to answer them all, so I may skip some, but we'll just see where it takes us. So question number 1. What's the most important, a good character, plot or message? So quite frankly, I couldn't care less about a message, I suppose, unless it's non-fiction. But generally, I can read a book that has almost no plot and almost no message if it has good characters, but the other two things I can't cope with. So if I have a good plot but the characters suck, then that book is probably going to get DNF'd. So yeah, characters is my answer in a waffly roundabout way. Throwing in the word waffle as much as possible today, especially for Fraser over at Fraser Simons, because apparently waffle means something completely different in Canada, but here in my living room it means where you just talk utter drivel. So question number 2. Should one read books about ideas, opinions they disagree with? Yes, of course. I think disagree with is a bit strong. I think you should read books from other people's perspectives around a topic. However, for example, I would not be in any way, shape or form interested in picking up a book from the perspective of a white supremacist. So there are certain things that I have absolutely no interest in that person's point of view or opinion. But generally, yes, I think you should read around a topic to understand it more. Question number 3. As tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? I still think books are going to be important. Obviously, I read quite a lot on my Kindle, so there are ways that I suppose reading is being made more accessible to people. So instead of having to carry a book around with you, you can read on your phone or just pop your Kindle in your bag, and it makes it a lot more accessible for a lot of people. Also, obviously not everybody has the space to store hundreds of books. So again, electronic forms I think are probably going to be the way forward, but reading in itself I think will always be important. Well, it's certainly always going to be important to me, and I ram it down my kids' throats enough that it will always be important to them too. Next question. How important are summaries, reviews and art in your book choosing? So I generally don't read reviews before I've read a book. Obviously I watch BookTube, that's where I get most of my recommendations from. But I will be honest, if I start to think a book sounds interesting from what someone is saying, I tend to then skip the rest of their reviews so that I know less about it, if that makes sense. As far as art, yeah, I love a beautiful cover. And I will pick up books based on a pretty cover, but I will read books that I've heard good things about that have ugly covers too, if that makes sense. So yeah, it plays a part, but it's not the be all and end all, is what I'm trying to say. Should one ever skim or scan a book? Are you fucking mad? No, don't do that. That's like illegal. You should not be allowed to skim or scan a book ever. So caveat, unless it's a textbook, because, you know, you're not going to read like the whole of Principles of Biochemistry just to get to like one bit on like DNA sequencing. So so that's the one exception. But no, my OCD will not allow me to, if I you know when you're really tired at night and you're reading and you get to the bottom of the page and you're like, I have no idea what I just read. I have to go back and reread it. I can't just move forward knowing that it's probably not going to be that pivotal. No, I have to go back. Cannot, no. No. Should reading always be enjoyable? Enjoyable is a bit of a tricky word. Yes, I suppose is the easy, quick answer. But I mean, for me, I read a lot of books that are quite hard subjects. So I do like to read a lot about war, the Second World War in particular, and I'm trying to educate myself more around racism and the things that people with white privilege can do to minimise racism and fight against it. So those aren't enjoyable topics to read about, but the enjoyment comes from me having learned something that I didn't know before I picked up the book, or even with fiction. I've learned something, or I've grown in some way. I've developed some level of understanding of something I didn't understand before. Waffle. Next question. Is it important to be well read? It is important to me, for me to be well read. Define well read. For me, well read is to read diversely. So it's important for me to read more books from more perspectives, from more countries, backgrounds, ethnicities. That is my definition of well read, and that is what I strive to be. Is it important for everyone to be well read? I think it'd be nice. I don't think it's the end of the world if they're not. I think there are other forms of educating yourself outside of reading books, but I do think it's important for everybody to have a good understanding of like key topics that are important in our society today, I would say. Next question. I'm going to skip some now. Okay, if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? Now, a lot of people have said, no, you know, it's the nostalgia, it's the process of reading. Mate, I would absolutely download that shit to my brain and save myself time. I am so time poor. I don't even have time to go to the bathroom on my own. I was in the toilet this morning with my 2-year-old and my dog, because that is my life. So yes, if I could download stuff to my brain and not spend hours getting it in there, then yes, I would do that. Yes. What are your views on rereading a book? My view is that I need to do it more. So I am going to try next year to reread a bit more. There are a lot of books, particularly books that I read in my teenage years and early 20s that I have no recollection of now, but would like to go back to. So it is going to be sort of a goal for next year to try and reread some of those books, because I think you will get more out of them. And to be fair, my memory is pants, so it'll be like reading it for the first time again. What we got next? How do you feel about not finishing a book? So this is interesting because last year was the first year I've ever DNF'd a book, and I am old. So it kind of finally clicked in my brain that actually there are so many amazing books out there that I want to read. Why struggle through a book that you're just not gelling with? Because not only does it then take you longer to get through that to get to another book that you actually want to read, you're likely to be put into a reading slump, and then you just don't want to pick up anything because the last book you read was so fucking awful. So no, I am well on the DNF train now. I've DNF'd loads of books this year, somewhere between 5 and 10. But that is a lot for me. I have massive fear of missing out, but it's actually helping being on BookTube, because I tell you which ones I've DNF'd, and most people say, oh yeah, I finished that and it wasn't worth the effort. So I'm like, fab, excellent, save myself a job. So yes, I definitely think if you're not enjoying something, just put it down. Should the author's personal life matter at all? Well, Brandon, that's an inflammatory question, isn't it? For me, I separate the book from the author. I generally don't know anything about the authors that I'm picking up unless I've particularly been looking for something like an Indigenous author or an author from a certain country to gain that perspective. I generally don't know anything about authors. So for me personally, it doesn't matter. I am aware that there are certain authors that have said things and done things that are seen as not very nice. And so when I started this channel, I did think about how I was going to manage that. And I think generally I just won't mention their books. I will still read them, I will still consume them, but I wouldn't want to hurt anyone's feelings over a book. So yeah. And also, if that author is dead, then kind of I then almost view it as a non-issue, because they're not going to benefit from any publicity because they're dead. Does that make sense? Maybe. Okay. Whew. Made me sweat at that question. So, if you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? Oh, that's a hard one. I think I'm going to have to go fantasy here, because there are so many different types of fantasy, and fantasy is my go-to when I really want to escape, when I don't want to listen to the woes of the world anymore. I just want to be in a different place. That's where I go. I also think it's quite fantasy, especially now, you can get a lot of different cultural representation through fantasy. So you can have sort of Eastern fantasy and African fantasy and South American fantasy and Indigenous fantasy. So you can get quite a lot of those different cultural vibes through fantasy now. So yeah, that's what I'm going to pick if I'm pushed up against the wall. But man, you know, I read everything. So that was tough, but mean. Do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? All the time, because I buy books when I think they sound good, and then I forget everything about them. And then by the time I pick them up, I can't remember what they're about. So yes, pretty much every book I read, I know nothing about. What author, genre, series or culture can you just not get into? Well, I have mentioned before, Stephen King is a bit, I can't really get into Stephen King. And contemporary romance, generally, I just don't care. But that's probably about it. Everything else, I'll give it a good go. Oh, series, I tried Shadow and Bone this year by Lee Bardugo, and I read the first two and wanted to blow my brains out. So that's a series that I can't get into. Question 20. Do you think everyone should read? Why? I think everyone should read if they want to read. That's a political answer, isn't it? Yeah, I think each to their own, really. I wish everybody got the same joy out of reading that I do, but they don't. So I don't think people should be forced to read if they don't want to read. Though there is an exception to that, and that is my children. They have to read because otherwise they get grounded. So yeah, that is it. Those are all the questions that I'm going to do. I only missed a few out, but yeah, those are my thoughts for what they were, and it was lovely to see you all. I didn't look at who's done this tag before, so I don't know who to tag. Let's just say if you want to do this tag, then do this tag. I would particularly recommend it if you are a newer booktuber and people are still kind of getting to know how you work and operate. I think it's quite insightful. So yes, right. Thanks very much, guys, and I will see you in the next one.